All right, so what we're going to look at today is how to properly embed our quotations inside our text. I worked with some English teachers on this just to get an idea of the best way to show you how to embed your quotations within a paragraph or a statement. It just looks so much better in writing rather than a quote that stands out, has no meaning. And so when we work with these embedding quotations, I hope to see this in your writing as we go throughout the year. Let's get started. So what do these three things have in common? They are all naked and ugly, although beautiful in their own ways. Quotations that are naked in your paper are just as ugly. And you'll see what I mean by that in a second. So to embed, to fix an object firmly or deeply in a surrounding mass. Um, so when you embed a quote, you are fixing it or placing it into a sentence. Really, what you're trying to do is make it sound as if you wrote it. You really don't want to just have a quotation that has no meaning before or after. The purpose of quotations is to support your thinking. So you'll see more as we go along. So why is it important? It's important because they add strong evidence when used appropriately. However, embedding quotations effectively into sentences is just as important as finding the correct quotation. Correctly embedding quotations move the reader from the quoted text back into the paragraph smoothly. I know some of you probably, you'll write, according to the author, or I found in the text, or in this book, or on this website. And we want to get away from that. It's just an awkward transition, and you want to work on embedding it, making it smooth, a smooth process. So, a freestanding quote, naked and ugly. So, when you use a quotation in an essay and you do not embed it, it's freestanding. So it means it has no introduction, no context, no explanation. It just stands alone. So what you'll see is I'm going to give you an example on the bottom, and we'll use the same quote throughout, and you'll see the difference between freestanding and embedded. So on the bottom, and I took this right from your project that you're working on now. So, e.g., for example, the government was further established under the concept of federalism, the principle that the national government shares sovereign powers with the state governments. Free standing and alone, it means nothing. It sort of describes what federalism is, but there's no context or explanation to it, right? So what I like to say is that you want to think of your quotations as a sandwich. Your quotation is the meat and cheese of your sandwich, and it needs to have the bread surrounding it, wrap, whatever you want it to be. So you have your lead in, it provides context, it signals a quote's coming. You're using transition words, for instance, for example, or in fact, and then your quote. It's the meat. So it has to be succinct. It has to be short and to the point. As you progress academically, you'll get into a position where you can take large chunks of quotes. But for our purposes today, we really don't want to be doing that, and you really want to focus on getting right to the point. Why did you choose this piece of evidence? And so that's a very important piece of it. And then the lead out, the connecting sentences, the bread, they make connections for the reader. So why is it important? And then it moves from the quote to your own point of view. So how do you pick it? So choosing the appropriate quote is just as important as embedding it. The right quote can advance the original ideas in your essay and help readers to understand and agree with your points. Just because you have chosen a quote does not mean it supports what you are saying. And I get that all the time. Students will find a quote because they like what it says, and then they'll just plop it into the middle of their paragraph, but it doesn't relate to anything that they talked about. And that is distracting, and it's just not used properly. So you have to find something that really, really supports what you're trying to say. Right. So how do you prepare it? So I did a lead in. So we're working with that same quote. So I said, according to the text, the government was further established under the concept of federalism, the principle that the national government shares sovereign powers with the state governments. But again, there's still no context there. I'm just kind of explaining what federalism is. So how could you introduce it to ensure it's not freestanding? Is it a smooth transition? And this, as it stands in front of you, is not. So what you could do is you could kind of create this outline. You have your lead in, your quote, and then your analysis. So you'll see that I took the three pieces, I wrote them separately, and then in one of the next slides, you'll see how it all works together. So My lead in fact, when looking at the conflict between the power of the federal and state governments, it was further established, this is the quote, was further established under the concept of federalism, the principle that the national government shares sovereign powers with the state governments. Uh, and then I have it quoted, and then there's the period at the end. This idea of federalism allowed the states to retain some of their independence while still giving the federal government the power it lacked under the Articles of Confederation. So I'm still working with that same quote I have been throughout the entire presentation, where I'm describing that federalism is the idea that the national government shares powers with the state governments. Right, that's important. So when you look at the conflict between the federal and state government, I'm then defining what it is, and then I'm telling you why it's important. So the final product would be, in fact, when looking at the conflict between the power of the federal and state governments, it was further established under the concept of federalism, the principle that the national government shares sovereign power with the state governments. This idea of federalism allowed the states to retain some of their independence while still giving the federal government the power it lacked under the Articles of Confederation. So now you see the entire thing in a completed form, where I'm telling you why there was conflict between the state and federal governments. I'm saying how they solve that issue by federalism, which is the two governments sharing power. And then I'm telling you why it's important. And that's because under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government did not have that power. It went entirely to the states. So that should give you a better idea of how to embed. You can see I did not put according to the author, according to the text. It looks like I wrote that. But with the quotation marks, you know that I took that from somewhere. I cited it Starks in the U.S. Constitution, so it's one of the databases you'll be looking at. And so I took that idea and I put it together into my own words, and it really drives home the point. So when you're working on your papers for the conflicts and compromises, that's what you want to try to do. You want to find that evidence that really proves your point. Why is this important? And then embed that quotation. So hopefully that helped. And if you have any questions, just be sure to ask.